The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, let's get started. Hi, I'm Tristan Ratchford, co-founder and CEO of Apitite.
Hi, I'm Todd Soul. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Apitite.
And we want to welcome you to our webinar on how to create an API for MongoDB in minutes. Firstly, I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day for attending our webinar. We both understand that you're very busy, so we really appreciate it. So I know you all heard of MongoDB, but Apitite might be a bit new for a lot of you. Before we dive into the webinar, I want to briefly tell you about Apitite and how it can help you create APIs. So Apitite is a cloud service for creating and managing APIs. We want to make it easy for anyone to create an API in minutes and without having to write a line of code. Typically, building an API can take days, if not weeks, to build, and it involves coding up an API, hosting it, securing it, and ongoing maintenance. With Apitite, we do all these things for you and make it easy for you to test and modify your API. Just like taxes, APIs can be complicated, so our goal is to become the TurboTax for APIs. So how does Apitite work? Well, creating an API and putting it to work takes 4 simple steps. Step 1, log on to Apitite via the web. Step 2, connect the data source to Apitite. A data source is where your API will get its data. One type of data source you can connect to Apitite is a database. We support both SQL and NoSQL style databases, including MongoDB, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, and Oracle. Another type of data source you can connect is you can upload a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet to Apitite. Whoops. The third step in creating an API is to create an API endpoint. An endpoint is where users of your API will go to interact with your API. Endpoints also allow API consumers to insert, update, delete data, as well as run transformations. Finally, step 4 is to start using your API. Users can interact with your API by going to an endpoint with their browser or programmatically with a web application. There, they'll have the option of downloading the data as an Excel spreadsheet, which is great for creating reports, or as JSON data, which is great for web applications. In addition to our Cloud API service, we also offer cloud storage for both SQL and NoSQL style databases. If you have data that cannot leave the firewall, we also offer enterprise deployments of Apitite. And if you need something custom, just let us know. We can help you build anything. Okay, let's get down to business. In today's webinar, we're going to complete 2 tasks. In the first task, we will show you how to create an API for MongoDB in minutes using Apitite. Then, in the second task, we will show you how to visualize the data with an interactive, lightweight web application. We just want to remind you that the entire webinar is being recorded and that we'll email the links and all materials to you after the webinar is closed. This includes all code, slides, and everything. So you don't need to take notes, just sit back and relax. Also, I will be active on the chat, so if you have a question, just please put in the chat or ask me directly and I'll be happy to answer it. And don't forget, we'll be giving away free stuff a little bit later, so stay connected. All right, let's start building. And now I'm going to hand it over to my CTO, Todd Soul, and he's going to kick off the webinar. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Todd, and today I'm going to give you a demo of Apitite, showcase some of its features, and as Tristan mentioned, we have 2 main tasks that we're going to complete. So let's get started on the first one. The first task is we're going to build an API for MongoDB in just a handful of minutes. And the idea being that you don't have to write a line of code to do it. It's quick, it's relatively easy, and you'll be able to test and modify the API very quickly. So let's get started on that. So you can see what we're going to be doing is we have a sample MongoDB database, and in it we have some sales data. And we're going to hook Apitite up to that database, and then we're going to create some endpoints that return the most recent sales. So let's get started. So this is the Apitite landing page, and the first thing you're going to want to do is log in. You can create an account. I already have one, so I'll just log right in. So this is my home page, and it shows the APIs that I have. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a new API. So let's click the Create API button, and this dialog box comes up. Now we give our API a name that people can see, so we'll just call this the MongoDB webinar API. Then we give it a description. This will let your users know exactly what the API does. So let's just say this is a public sample API for retrieving sales data from our MongoDB database. Next, you want to give a URL route for your API. And this is the actual URL that people will go to use your API and to view documentation on it. So let's just say MongoDB webinar. And then we choose a security level. We have 3 security levels. The first one's public. That means anyone, anywhere can see and use your API. The second one's unlisted, which means that we won't list your API publicly, but anyone who knows the URL will be able to use it. And the third one's private. This is a secure API. You give a list of people who are allowed to use it, and they can authenticate using OAuth, and you can permit your applications to access the API using tokens. So let's just do a public API for this one. So I click submit, and now the API is created. As Tristan said, there are 2 components to APIs, data sources and endpoints. Now our data source is going to be our MongoDB database. And the first endpoint we're going to make is an endpoint that allows you to just retrieve some orders from the database. And again, endpoints provide the actual functionality that make up an API. So let's do our data. Actually, the very first thing I'm going to do is turn this API onto live mode. Every API starts out in test mode. That makes sure that you're able to test your API and fiddle with it before people can actually use it. But I'm just going to turn on to live mode now so I don't forget later. Now let's add a data source. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is type in the name of the data source. We'll just call it MongoDB sales database. And it's an existing database, so now we can click add. And now you need to type in the credentials that will allow Apitite to connect to your database. So the very first thing you do is choose the database type. Ours is going to be MongoDB. And then you have to give a host name or IP address. Now some of you may be technical. You may know offhand this information. You may know how to look it up. If you don't know what the information is, you can just contact your database administrator, and they'll certainly be able to provide you with this information. So our database is actually hosted on Mongo Labs. So we have a host name of, let's see, it's ds031.531.mongolab.com. And then you give the database name. We called our database Apitite sample. You give a port number. It's filled in automatically with the default port number for MongoDB, but ours is a little different. It's 31531. And then you give the user name and password to log in. And then you click Save and Connect, and if you put in the information correctly, it's able to connect and it tells you so. And if you put in the information incorrectly, we'll try and give you, as best as the system can, the reasons why the connection failed. Hopefully we'll be able to tell you, oh, it's the wrong port number or the wrong database username or something like that.
Todd, sorry to interrupt. We
Yeah.
actually have a question from somebody on the line.
Oh, yeah.
From Rachel Round. She's saying that she has a database, but it's not accessible over the internet. What do you recommend for her to do?
If your database is not accessible over the internet, that's fine. We provide enterprise behind the firewall deployments to connect to existing databases that can't leave a company's firewall. Additionally, we also offer cloud storage, so you can store your data with us if you'd like.
Great.
Okay, so we've got the data source connected. Now let's start adding endpoints. So we go back to our dashboard and click Create Endpoint. And then we give it a name. So hold on one second. All right, so this endpoint is going to be getting orders. So let's just call it Get Orders to be simple. And then we give a description. So this is going to, hold on one second. We're just going to get 10 orders, let's say. And then you give it a route. So this is exactly like when you were creating an API. You give it a URL route. So this endpoint's route is going to be get data, or get orders rather. and you select the data source, and our MongoDB sales database is already selected. Then you click Add. So now here is where you fill out the information for how the endpoint is supposed to function. So the first thing you need to do is choose a collection. Now, since we've connected Apitite to our data source in this last step when we created a data source, Apitite actually goes and fetches all the collections that you have. So if we click here, you can see that there are 2 collections that Apitite was able to detect, and we're just going to do the orders one. And then you choose the operation. So you can do a find operation, or you can do any of the others. The APIs don't have to be just about getting data out. You could also put data into your database with an insert, update data, or remove data. And then there's this aggregate function, which if you're familiar with MongoDB, you might know what it is. And we're going to go over it with the next endpoint we create. But the first one we're going to do is a find. And then here is all the information you need to fill out to make your endpoint function. And this is just MongoDB query language. So if you're familiar with MongoDB, then this will make sense to you. If you're not familiar with MongoDB, then we provide some documentation and links to help you get started. So query criteria, we're going to leave that blank to start with. Subset of fields to return, we're going to leave that blank. Sort order blank. The only thing we're going to put in right now is a limit, because we don't want to return the entire collection. That's too much data. So let's just say 10 records. Then we're going to click Save. And at this point, believe it or not, we have a fully functioning API. So if we were to go back to our MongoDB webinar API and go down, you can see we've created an endpoint. I'll turn on to live mode. And then here's the endpoint URL. And if you were to click this, now you can view the endpoint as if you were an API user. So this is what a user of your API actually sees if he or she goes to the website. And you can see highlighted already is this human request tab. So again, we told you that you don't need to write any code, and that's not just for API creators. API users also don't need to write any code if they don't want to. They can just come to this website and click View JSON, and you can see we've downloaded the first 10 records of the database right onto the screen. You can also click Download JSON, and that'll download a file for you. Okay, great. And now you can see the order information. Each order has an ID, a date, an item, a price, a quantity, a customer, and a credit card number. So before we go on, I just want to make it clear right now that we have created an API in just a handful of minutes, and it would have been even quicker if I hadn't been talking. So that's the idea. And now we're going to modify the API. I want to showcase some of the other features of Apitite. So there's this credit card field right here. That's clearly sensitive information. So let's edit that out. So we're going to go back to the API, back to our endpoint and edit it. And we're going to, in the subset of fields to return, we're just going to say credit card 0 to exclude credit cards. We're going to save it, go back to our endpoint, and we're going to click View JSON again. And you can see it returns the same data, only without the credit card. So that's another aspect I wanted to highlight of how quickly it is to test your API and to make modifications to it. So now let's go back and do a little bit more. First, let's return this in a certain order. Let's return these records by order of the date they were created. Let's do ascending, so date 1. And now we can only right now get 10 orders. But obviously a user is going to want to get a certain, is going to want to get different orders, not just the first 10 every time. So we're going to add a skip parameter. A parameter is something that the user will fill in when he or she is making a request to the endpoint, and that'll determine the kind of data that's returned. So parameters are made when you type the hash symbol and then curly braces, and then you give a name for the parameter. So we're just going to call this skip. And you can see we've detected a skip parameter down here, and we just need to give it a type. It's going to be a number, and we're going to give it a description. And we'll say how many orders to skip, sort of the offset. And then we're going to click Save. And if you go back to the endpoint, and refresh the page. Okay. You can see that there's now a skip parameter. So if I were to put in the value 100, say I want to skip the first 100 records, I can type 100 in there and then click View JSON, and it'll fetch the records having skipped the first 100. So again, this is as a human user, but obviously we provide programmatic requests too. This is how APIs are typically used if you're writing an application. And we document the parameters that the API endpoint takes, the URL to use, and we give some sample JSON code for making an AJAX request.
Actually, yeah. Todd, it would be possible to show us that in the browser?
Sure. So if I were to,
or actually in the URL bar, I was thinking.
Oh, in the URL bar. Okay. Yeah, it's very easy. So if we were to do get orders, and then just specify JSON, and let's say we want to skip 0 records, it's just a GET request, and therefore you can see right in the browser the data. Okay, there's one last thing I want to showcase with this endpoint, and that is an advanced feature called JavaScript transformation code. So let's go back here. We actually allow you to modify the data in any way you like between the point at which the data is retrieved from the database and the point at which it is sent back to the user. So I don't know why particularly you'd want to do this, but let's say you want to capitalize the name of every item. So, and this, again, this is an advanced feature. You don't need to use this if you don't want to, certainly, but you just would need to write a JavaScript function called transform, and you can code it right here. So let's say, so the response is an array of objects, and we'll just say for var I 0, I is less than the number of objects, we'll say response.item I equals response.item I dot to uppercase. This is just vanilla JavaScript. And then we'll enable it and save it. And if I typed everything correctly, then when I click View JSON again, no, I didn't type everything correctly. Response.item I equals response.I dot to uppercase. I may have a typo here. Oh.
Refresh.
I shouldn't have to. Let's just try it again without that. Okay, well, I can't type live. Tristan, do you see?
Try enabling it again.
I'll try it one more time. Yeah, I'm just response I dot item. Sorry.
Hey, Rudy found it.
What?
Thank you, Rudy.
Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, good. I'm not going insane. I just can't code live. Okay, so now you can see the item in every one of these records has been capitalized. And you can do any arbitrary transformation you want. You don't even have to make it return an array of objects if you want. You could have it return a number or a string or something else. So I think that is the end of our first task. And we're going to take I'm going to take a very brief intermission while Tristan explains some giveaways. And then we're going to move on to the second task, which is a more technical one where we build a front-end web application using a new API that we're going to create. So let me get here.
So as Todd said, we're going to take a brief intermission to give you guys free stuff. Like, you guys shouldn't have to wait to the end to get to the free stuff. So let's give Todd a break and let's see what we got. So first, just as a big thank you for taking time out of your day and joining our webinar, we want to give you a free t-shirt. So if you want a free t-shirt with Apitite, please just send me your t-shirt size and your shipping address, and we'll ship you a t-shirt. The t-shirt won't look like this little thing that I drew here. It'll be much more awesomer, I promise. So send me your stuff, and I will be happy to ship you that. Next, we are also offering free consulting. Basically, if you have a project or a custom thing you have in mind and you want to basically talk to us about it and kind of to spec it out, we would love to help you and hear from you. So if you have anything you want to be built, just please contact us, and we'd be happy to talk it over. Even if it's just general questions about APIs, even if it has nothing to do with our service, we'd be happy to help you with that. So feel free to contact us. Another thing, too, is that we want to thank you again for joining our webinar. So we're offering you an exclusive deal. We're giving you guys 50% off all of our plans for 6 months. So if you sign up for our startup plan or our business plan, we will give you 50% off that for 6 months. To get that, all you have to do is just enter the code MongoAPI when you are doing the checkout, and you will get the deal that way. Cool. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Todd, and we're going to jump into our second task right now.
Okay, so our first task was intended for a wide variety of people with technical proficiencies, and the second one is definitely aimed more at web developers, because we're going to be writing a small, lightweight, front end only web application, and we're going to be writing it in JavaScript, and it's going to use jQuery. So I just wanted to give you a fair warning that is who the next task is aimed at. So I think the easiest way to get started is to show you most of the app already built, what its functionality is right now, and what we're going to add to it together. So this is the app. It's just a web page that's being served up. It's an HTML file and a JavaScript file. And it's our example application. And what we want to be able to do is we want to take that sales data I was just showing you, the order data, and compare it between 2 different years for a given month. So for instance, actually, you can already see it, but I'll refresh the page. So let's say we wanted to compare the data in the month of February between 2015 and 2014. And then we want to be able to select what exactly we're comparing, either the total number of orders or the total revenue for each day. So let's hit compare. And you can see right now the application is only half built because we only display one of the lines. We only display the data for the first year that we chose, 2015. But it makes this little graph or this line chart. And what we want to do now is add in another line for the second year so that the second year parameter isn't ignored. Now, just a few words before we start. We're using a handful of tools to help us build this, so we don't have to write everything from scratch. We're using jQuery. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. It's just used for manipulating the DOM and making AJAX calls. We use chart.js to draw the actual chart. We use Twitter Bootstrap. It's not really necessary, but it just makes everything look a little prettier. The boxes and the buttons look prettier. And then we use underscore.js in just 1 or 2 locations. And that is a collection of utility functions for manipulating data. And so let's first take a look at the HTML for that page. We're not going to spend much time here. It's already built out. Most of it's not really interesting. Here's the form where we built the form for choosing the month and the first year and the second year, and the category. By category, I mean either orders or revenue. And the only other thing of interest is this canvas tag down here, and this is where our chart goes. So we're done with that. And now let's look at the JavaScript file. So this is the JavaScript file. Most of it's built out again. We're just going to add the functionality to get the second year data. And a few things to note. We have a handful of methods here of functions. There's onSubmitClick. This is the function that runs when someone clicks the compare button. There's the drawChart function. This, as you probably guessed, draws the actual chart. And then we just have 2 utility functions for getting the start date and the end date that we're going to send to our API in the correct format. So the first thing we need to do is create the API endpoint to get the data back. So let's actually first see what is the format of the data we want returned. And I think I listed here. Yeah, here's what we want. These lines right here. We want the user to be able to select a month, a start date, and an end date, and then we want our API to return a record for each day in that month. And each day has a record with an ID saying the day of the month that it is, the total number of orders for that day, and the total revenue. So now we know what we're trying to return, so let's figure out how to build an API endpoint that actually returns that info. So let's go back to Apitite. I can use the same API and just make a new endpoint. I'm going to click Create Endpoint. Let's make a new one. Let's call this Get Orders Grouped by Day. And then a description. Hold on one. Get orders, let's say, get orders between a start and end date, user supplied, grouped by day, sum up the number of orders in total revenue for each day. And let's give it a URL route. Let's make this get orders by day. And the same data source, and let's click Add. Okay, so again, we're going to choose the collection we want, orders. This time we're going to do an aggregate command. And an aggregate command, we didn't make this up. This is MongoDB language, and aggregations are used for performing some computations on the data that you're going to return. You can do things like group bys, you can sum columns, you can multiply them together. So anytime you want to do any sort of transformation on the data with the MongoDB query, you use an aggregation. It's called a pipeline because it consists of a series of stages. So let's get started writing this pipeline. So it's an array of stages. And the first stage is going to be our match stage. This tells MongoDB, and again, if you're like a MongoDB programmer, you know exactly what I'm doing. But if you don't, again, we provide some documentation, and we link to MongoDB documentation where you can find out exactly how to use this. But the first one, it's going to be a match. We're going to match. This tells MongoDB which records we want to get, and these are going to be dependent on the start and end date parameters that are sent to the API. So we're going to match the date field, and we're going to say where the date is greater than or equal to, and then we're going to pass in a date, which is, and we're using this parameter notation again, the start date that the user passes in. And then it's greater than or equal to that, and it'll be less than the date, which is the end date that the person passes in. And that's it for the first stage of the pipeline. That's the match. Now we're going to do a group. This is like a group by clause in if you're familiar with SQL databases. So we'll do a group. And each group clause has an ID. This is what to group the record by. So we'll give it an ID. And what are we going to group the records by? They're by the day of the month that they fall on. So MongoDB has this convenient operator called day of month. And that's going to be based on our date field. So that is the ID. And then what else is a record going to contain? Well, it's going to contain the sum of the orders, right? So we want the orders to be the sum of, we just put a 1 because it's going to sum up each order record that we encounter. And finally, we want the revenue. And what is the revenue going to be? Well, it's also going to be a sum. And it's going to be a sum of, if you remember the records, we had a quantity and a price. So we're going to multiply together. Multiply the quantity field and the price field. And so that is the group by clause, but definitely the most complicated of the three. And the last one is just going to be how we the order in which we return these records. So this is a sort, and we're going to return it in ascending order by the day of the month. And that's it. So the start and end date will be strings. So we're going to give a description to our parameters. So we'll say start date, string, in format year, month, day. For instance, 2015, 0101. And end is going to be end date, string, format year, month, day. For instance, February 1st. And now we'll save it. That saved successfully. We're going to test out the endpoint. I'm a little nervous because I just typed a whole lot of code, but let's see if it works. So now I can just click this link at the top of the page, and this will bring me to the endpoint as if I were a user. And let's get all the dates, all the data for January of 2015. Click View JSON. And there you have it. It returns. You can see the ID is the day of the month, and then the total orders for that day and the total revenue for that day. So we've made the API, and now we can go back and finish up the application. So the way the application was able to get data without me having created that API first is that it was just going to, I previously created an API called webinar template. We can now exchange this if we want to for MongoDB webinar. And that should still work. So let's refresh the page. Let's look at the orders for January. Oh, you know what? I need to make that endpoint live. So let's go back here, make it live, and now let's try this again. Sure, we can just compare that. And there we go. Okay. So again, we're now hooked up to our live API, and we're getting one line of data. Let's get the data for the second year. So we're going to go back to our JavaScript file, and we're going to make another request. So you can see here are the first year parameters. Now let's get the parameters for the second year request. So we'll say var second year params equals $.param. That's just a jQuery function for getting parameters in the right string format. It will escape special characters, and in fact, it's not even that necessary for our requests because they don't use any special characters, but we'll do it just to be safe. So we'll get the start of the second year string, given in the month string, and then let's get the end date. So get end and the same parameters, the second year string and the month string. So the values we're passing in here are just like 2015 for the second year string and January or 01. So now we have the second year parameters. And you can see we made an AJAX call like this before, and that's the typical way in jQuery to make an AJAX call. Ours is going to be a little trickier because we need 2 AJAX calls to be fired off, and we need to wait for both of them to complete before drawing the chart. So we're going to modify this function just a little bit. So actually, we're going to take that function out, and we're going to attach just a handler to this AJAX call. And these things are called deferreds. It's what a jQuery AJAX call returns. So our first deferred is this first request, and then we're going to have a second deferred. which is going to be, I think I can basically just copy this, the second request with the second year parameters. And then jQuery provides a function called when, and you provide all the deferreds that you want to wait for. So we're going to do first and second. And then you provide a callback. First year results, second year results. So this callback, this function will be executed once both AJAX calls complete. Now let's just note that each of the arguments to this callback is an array of the form data, text status, and jQuery XHR request. This is what jQuery provides. We're only interested in the data. So we're going to say first year data equals first year results 0, and then second year data equals second year results 0. Okay, and now let's just draw the chart. Draw a chart. We're going to pass in the category, first year string as a label, first year data, and now we need to pass in the second year stuff. Second year string as the label, and second year data as the data. So we'll need to expand now our draw chart function to have the second year stuff, the second year parameters. And you can see here, this is the data that you pass in to the chart.js chart function. This is all documented on the chart.js page, by the way. And most of the data, it looks hairy at first glance, but it's just telling it what colors to draw the lines, which we're not so much concerned with. We're more concerned with this data field, and this is the actual data we return. So let's move this into here, because now we're going to add a second data set to draw. Let's uncomment it. Okay, so the second data set, it's going to have a label of the second year string, so 2014 or whatever. And then what's the data we want to give it? Well, it's going to depend on what category the person chose, whether the person chose orders or revenue. And to do that, we use this convenience function from underscore.js called pluck, and it'll just take out all of the records or all of the fields for the category that you chose. So let's pluck from the second year data whatever the category was. So if the category is orders, then this will return an array of all the orders data. And that is it. So if I've typed everything correctly, and I'm sure I'm guaranteed to have made a mistake, this should work now. So if we go back to our web application, refresh it, and then choose, let's compare, say, February for 2015 and 2014, and then click compare. You can see it works. We now have two lines drawn on the graph. And if we wanted to choose to compare revenue rather than orders, we could change this to revenue. And now you're comparing total revenue for each day in the month of February from one year to the next. So I think that is it for the demo. And again, the takeaways from this, I wasn't trying to teach you how to write a web application. I just wanted to show you that this web application is front-end only. It doesn't require any server-side code. It just needs the server to serve up the static file. The only backend on this is our AJAX requests to our Apitite APIs that we created. And again, you can modify those quickly and easily. You don't have to host the API for yourself. You can have us host it. We handle the, sorry, I wasn't very clear there. We host all the APIs, and we handle the security. We do all the things that you don't want to have to do yourself.
Cool. And that's actually putting up the PDF.
Yes.
And that more or less concludes the webinar for today. I really, really want to thank everybody for coming. Todd and I are going to hang around for the next 5 or 10 minutes. If you guys have any questions, just raise your hand in the little thing. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but if you raise your hand on the GoToWebinar, I can unmute you and you can ask your question to us, and we'll be happy to answer it. But if otherwise, we'll give you back your 15 minutes. And I want to thank everybody. And remember that we have this promotion going on, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. We're sticking around for the next one. Okay, so we don't have any questions at this time. If you have any personal questions, feel free to email me or call me. You can find us on our contact page. And once again, we'll be sending out all materials after this. And I wanted to thank you very much for attending our webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.